This move, the Sicilian defense, immediately creates an unbalanced pawn structure and prepares to fight for central space by challenging white's e4 pawn. Developing the knight to f3 prepares to castle kingside and supports a central pawn advance, common in many Sicilian defense variations. This move, 2, d6, establishes a solid pawn structure and prepares to develop the kingside bishop, often leading to variations of the Sicilian defense. Developing the knight to f6 continues the active defense of the Sicilian Najdorf and prepares for kingside castling while challenging white's central pawn control. This move develops a knight towards the center while defending the e4 pawn, a standard continuation in the open Sicilian, preparing for further central control and piece activity. This move prepares to control the b5 square, preventing white's nc3b5 or bd3b5 outpost ideas and supporting a potential b5 pawn push to gain queenside space. This move develops a minor piece and prepares to castle, reinforcing the central pawn and controlling key squares while adhering to standard opening principles in the Sicilian defense. This move, 6, e5, challenges white's central knight, aiming to gain space and initiate a pawn structure characteristic of the accelerated dragon, Sicilian or the classical variation. This move returns the knight to a square it previously occupied, a common maneuver in the Sveshnikov Sicilian variation to prepare for potential kingside castling, and to offer a solid defensive setup against black's developing initiative. This move develops the bishop to a more active square, immediately challenging black's knight and creating a pin that restricts its mobility. This move develops the knight to its most natural square, preparing to support a future e5 pawn push or potentially reposition to c5 or b6 for central influence. This knight maneuver aims to challenge black's central pawn structure by potentially exchanging on e7 and opening the g-file, or by forcing black to commit the knight further. This move on h6 challenges the aggressive knight on h4, forcing white to either retreat it or exchange it, thereby disrupting white's immediate attacking ambitions. This move re-centers the knight towards the kingside, preparing to support a potential kingside pawn advance or contest the d-file. The recapture on f3 aims to maintain central tension and avoid doubling white's pawns, but it allows black's knight to develop to a more active square on b6, potentially targeting c4. This move logically develops the bishop to an active square, supporting the d6 pawn and preparing for potential queenside castling while contesting the light squared diagonal. Castling king's side secures the king and prepares to connect the rooks, a fundamental positional goal in this Sicilian Najdorf variation. This move immediately challenges white's strong knight on c3, aiming to improve black's piece activity and potentially gain control of key central squares. This move exchanges the bishop for the knight, simplifying the position and preventing black from utilizing the knight's control over the d2 and c4 squares. This move recaptures the bishop and centralizes your queen's knight, preparing to contest the open c-file and potentially expand on the queenside. This move prepares to challenge black's potentially dominant bishop on c4 by developing the rook to an open file and offering a trade that can simplify the position. By castling, black secures their king and prepares to connect their rooks, a standard developing maneuver in this variation of the Sicilian defense. This move repositions the knight to a more active square, aiming to exchange white's bishop on c4 and improve black's pawn structure by removing an advanced Defender. This retreat of the bishop reinforces the pawn chain and prepares for future kingside play by unblocking the d-pawn. This move aggressively challenges white's central control by pushing the f-pawn, aiming to open lines for attack while simultaneously creating potential weaknesses in white's kingside pawn structure. This pawn capture clarifies the center, opening lines for white's rook and potentially creating attacking chances on the kingside after f5. This move recaptures the pawn and opens the g-file for potential attacking pressure, preparing for an aggressive pawn storm on the kingside. This move forces the white knight to move, achieving the goal of freeing up black's queen and knight on b6 while also developing an attacking threat on the kingside. This move skillfully shifts the king away from the active queen diagonal, preparing to potentially reinforce the kingside or redeploy the rook. This move, by capturing the b2 pawn, wins material but exposes your king and allows white to activate their pieces more effectively by opening lines. This move aims to reposition the knight to a more active central square, potentially attacking weaknesses in black's pawn structure and offering counterplay. This exchange of pieces clarifies the pawn structure and opens lines for white's rook. But black now has a strong central pawn majority. This pawn recapture opens the e-file, challenging black to prove the queen's excursion to b2 is worthwhile and to defend the d6 pawn. This recapture, nxd5, sacrifices the knight for a pawn but also activates black's pieces and opens the b-file for potential queen activity, aiming to disrupt white's pawn structure. This move repositions the knight to a more central square, targeting the queen and potentially creating tactical opportunities while preparing to challenge white's pawn structure. This move aims to regain the pawn by attacking the knight on c4, but allows white to maintain the pawn advantage and consolidate their position due to the exposed nature of the queen. This move, nxd6, is a tactical punishment for black's passive pawn play, aiming to win material by attacking the undefended knight on d6 while simultaneously creating threats against black's queenside. Black's queen retreats to safety, but white now has excellent control of the central dark squares and a dynamic initiative due to the pressure on the d5 pawn. This move initiates a critical fight for control of the d6 square and potentially opens lines for white's pieces to attack black's king. This move repositions the bishop to a more active diagonal, aiming to support the knight on f6 and potentially control key central squares. This move aims to solidify white's pawn structure on the kingside and prepare to challenge black's active bishop on f6 by exchanging pieces. This move activates the rook on the d-file, contesting it with white's remaining rook and preparing to potentially exploit the weakened d5 pawn, or pressure white's queenside. This move aims to exploit the vulnerable black king by creating attacking chances along the g-file, and potentially opening lines towards the kingside. This exchange simplifies the position for black, removing a key attacking piece and allowing the knight to potentially become more active while giving up the central pawn on d5. This move initiates a tactical sequence to regain the sacrificed pawn, opening lines for white's pieces and creating pressure on black's queenside structure. This move repositions the queen to a safer square, potentially eyeing central targets and preparing to contest the open d-file, which is crucial after the pawn exchanges. This move centralizes the remaining rook, preparing to contest the open e-file and potentially support a pawn advance or coordinate with the other rook for an attack. This move is a defensive repositioning, bringing the knight back to c7 to protect the pawn on d6 and potentially reroute to a more active square like e6 or b5 later in the game. This move repositions the queen to a central square, attacking the d6 pawn and preparing to exploit white's somewhat compromised queenside pawn structure. This move repositions the knight to a more central and active square, preparing to contest the d5 pawn and potentially support a future d5 push, while also creating defensive cover for the kingside. This move captures a pawn and opens up a dangerous diagonal for white's queen, but it also allows black to activate their rook and potentially launch a counterattack on the queenside. This move recaptures the attacked pawn, but critically abandons the defense of the d-pawn, allowing white to create a powerful passed pawn on d5 which will become a significant strategic advantage.